Welcome to the Timeless Marketing Podcast with Brian Kurtz, your connection to insights from some of the top direct response marketing minds on the planet.
Hey, it's Brian Kurtz here, host of the Timeless Marketing Podcast. Today's episode is a clip from one of the 2-hour calls inside Titan's Accelerator, my private mentorship program for direct response marketers. Before we get to that, I have one question for you. Do you have a marketing insurance policy? If you don't, you need one. And that's why I created Titan's Accelerator, which is one of the most giving communities and serves as the de facto board of advisors and marketing insurance policy for over 250 of the best and brightest direct response marketers, copywriters, media buyers, marketing agencies, senior executives, anyone in direct response marketing who is committed to growing and scaling their business. The bottom line, you don't have to grow your business alone. And you don't need to spend tens of thousands of dollars either. Titan's Accelerator is 1/10 of the price of most groups of its kind. I know because I hosted a group that was over $20,000 a year. If you want to see how Titan's Accelerator can help you grow and scale your specific business, go to briankurtz.net/help. That's BRIANKURTZ.net/help. And with a private membership, you'll receive access to the full presentation from today's episode, along with the Q&A and discussion that followed. As an added bonus, you'll receive access to a vault filled with many more private calls just like this one. Again, if you want to see if Titan's Accelerator is a fit for you with no obligation, go to briankurtz.net/help. That's BRIANKURTZ.net/help. And feel free to email me directly. I respond to every email with questions about this episode or just to say hi at brian@briankurtz.net. Now on to today's episode. Hey, Jule, how are you?
I'm good. Just coughing up a lung here, but so happy to be here.
So if you do it, just do it off screen. If the lung comes up, do it off screen because it'll be disgusting. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, I'll keep that in mind.
Yeah. But Jule, it's the first time I've ever spoken to you, but we have communicated a lot through email when she joined Titan's Accelerator. I've been impressed with all the dialogue that we've had in email, and she put herself forward to discuss a topic that actually came up in the Profit. I mentioned this in my email and in my Facebook post for today's call. It came up during the Profit Partnering call yesterday, believe it or not, which is the concept of imposter syndrome, which if anybody has not experienced imposter syndrome on this call, you're lying. You're lying. Because everybody has experienced imposter syndrome in their life. And she was not tentative, but she said, I don't know if this is appropriate or not. And, and she was being polite, which was good. But I thought it was so powerful that she stepped forward on a topic like this, because, I believe that, and I've talked about this in the past, that there's a very thin line between marketing and personal development. If you don't think Tony Robbins has something to do with marketing, then you're not paying attention. And if you don't think everything we talk about in Titan's Accelerator has nothing to do with personal development and the person behind, we talked about it already today when Teresa said to David, it's the individual in your group. How do you relate to them? With breakthrough advertising, how do you relate to them? So I just believe that we have room in Accelerator for, personal improvement and lifestyle topics because everything because I believe marketing isn't the only thing. It isn't everything. It's the only thing. But saying that doesn't mean that it doesn't incorporate all of the personal development and lifestyle things, because, marketing is just part of how we live. We're always marketing ourselves. We're always selling ourselves. We're always selling products and services, but we're also selling in the world who we are and what we want to represent. So it ties in perfectly, Jule, and I'm so pleased that you're going to do this. I want you to give a little background. You gave some background in the Facebook group about yourself, but give a quick background of why you're an executive coach. I see that in your description in your square. But talk about how you came to being, we'll say, an expert in imposter syndrome, and why you were so keen on sharing this with the group today.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. So, like a lot of people who get into the fields they get into, especially in the mental health or wellness space, is because I myself suffered from imposter syndrome. So, before I was a coach, I was a photographer. And if some of you might be aware, in the Asian culture, going into a creative pursuit is really not encouraged. I think overall across the world culturally most people are aware and they have a perception that going into a creative field is probably not going to earn you as much money, is going to be a lot harder, but in the Asian cultures in particular it's even more discouraged. And so I come from a very like tech analytical background. I left my job at Amazon. It was sort of like a rage quit. I then decide, okay, I'm going to start my photography business. And I ran into imposter syndrome. Like it hit me like a truck. I ended up not making any money for 2 freaking years. And so today, when I work with the people I do, whether they're business owners or people in corporate, I can see those signs. And personally, I'm Korean. I grew up in Alabama. I didn't know that even just how my life started out was sowing the seeds for imposter syndrome, just feeling like you never belong in general. So in the US, people of color will experience imposter syndrome like a lot higher. So that's a little bit about me.
And so, are you going to share screen slides or no? You're going to, yes.
Yeah.
So, I just want to make sure that we have a good setup for whatever you're going to discuss. So, what I always ask this, like, what you have some qualifications to talk about it because of your Asian background, because you've experienced it bigly. But what other talk about who you coach now specifically? You said it was corporate and CEOs, but in any particular niche, any particular area that you specialize in, so people can get a little more context, and then share screen whenever you want.
Yeah, thank you. So I mainly work with executives or aspiring executives, particularly the women who are trying to go from that senior director title to a VP title or some C-level title. Generally, these people will get feedback that they didn't get the promotion because they lack confidence and they're too accessible, they're too approachable, they're too accommodating. So something I don't really cover in today's presentation is that imposter syndrome and people pleasing tend to go hand in hand. So all of my clients, I'm not lying, without exception, are people pleasers as well. So it's a little bit of a fun time here. But in terms of my certifications, I am a certified ICF coach. I'm also a certified imposter syndrome coach. I had the
How do you get qualified to be an imposter syndrome coach?
Well, one of the world's foremost experts on imposter syndrome, I'm saying like this lady, she literally wrote the first book on imposter syndrome, Dr. Valerie Young. She opened her very first program to start certifying people to be experts and specialists in the topic, I think back in 2022. And so I got to be in her debut program, like the very first cohort she ever had. So, there will be a lot of people out there who will say they're certified imposter syndrome coaches. They may have gone through a program, but I'm like, hey, I went through the program with the very first lady on the scene. So that's kind of my tie-in.
I love it. I love it. Are there letters that go next to your name to be an imposter syndrome coach?
Not for the imposter syndrome coach, but to be an ICF certified coach. I'm a PCC, a professional.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
I think that's neat. You learn something new every day, and that's wonderful that you are like a certified imposter syndrome coach. We got the right person here, so that's great.
Yeah, thank you. All right. So thank you for having me. Like I said, the topic is very near and dear to my heart. What I found that was the hardest, the day I found out what imposter syndrome was, it was both a huge feeling of relief because then I got to understand there was nothing wrong with me. The feelings that I'd been having that I was trying very hard to run away from, there was nothing wrong with me. But at the same time, I was really mad. Like I was so angry because to realize that I had just spent the last 2 years in the position I was in because of this. And just because I hadn't known about it, there's not a lot of awareness yet. I think imposter syndrome has hit the mainstream as kind of a buzzword, but I still meet more people, more than 50% of the people that I come across, they have no idea, especially if they're a little bit older. So 50 plus, even more so, they won't know. They've never heard the term. Anyway, but before I get into it, so this is my husband. His name is Jason. Jason and I used to share an office because we both work from home. His desk is in the left corner, and I have mine in the right corner. We both take meetings on Zoom. But when I take a meeting, I go into another room, which is here, whereas he just takes his meetings at his desk. And so because of this, like I've asked him so many times to turn his laptop to the wall, okay, so that it faces the wall and not the entire room. He doesn't do this. One day I come into the office and I see he's already in a meeting. And I have to get to my desk, but I don't want to walk across the screen on his video. Don't ask me why. I was just very neurotic, okay? I didn't like the idea of his teammates or people seeing me. And now Jason uses a standing desk, so it sits up higher. So I have this real bright idea that I'm going to drop to the floor and I'm going to crawl to my desk. And I'm thinking, no one's going to see me. Problem solved. So I'm crawling my way across the floor on my hands and knees, and I'm almost at my desk when my husband suddenly turns around and goes, "What are you doing?" So I look up at the screen and realized I had been visible the entire freaking time. And his teammates had watched me crawl across the floor the whole way. And one of them even says, "Trying not to be seen, huh?" So, not my finest moment. Here I was thinking I was being clever, totally missed the mark. So I felt really exposed. And for anyone who feels imposter syndrome, this feeling is kind of the worst nightmare. We will do anything to avoid being exposed or being discovered. So I'm a certified imposter syndrome coach, and today I'm going to tell you all about imposter syndrome. It's shaped my life in so many ways behind the scenes, and I never knew. So, this is the reason I spent so long making no money in my previous business. It's the reason why I've turned down countless opportunities. And it is the reason why so many people today will do the same. They will shy away from opportunities, or they have the idea and they just never get started. Now, what percent of people in general do you think feel imposter syndrome? Just call it out. Anybody? You have your choices.
I would say 70 to 90%.
Okay. Does anybody not agree with Brian?
Okay, I'll be the disagreeable. 45 to 69%.
Okay, thank you, Charlene. So Brian is actually correct. We have people in studies self-reporting more than 70% of the time. And, earlier Brian said, I think everybody feels imposter syndrome. And if you say you don't, you're lying. Kind of reminded me of Adam Grant saying the only people who don't feel imposter syndrome are narcissists. So there you go.
Yeah, Adam. Yeah, I remember that from Adam. Absolutely.
Okay, now what about this one? Somebody not Brian. Who wants to take a guess? Which of these groups in the US have the highest rate of imposter syndrome, self-reported? Anyone?
Oh,
I think
everybody's
Asian.
saying Asian.
I want to say Asian.
Okay. And
See, I'm going to say African Americans, but that's because of what I see a lot them talking about that they have to mask so
But
much.
they don't like to be called African Americans. They like to be called Black Americans.
Well, some do and some don't.
Yeah.
I think Asians don't talk much. And it's like their problems largely go unnoticed because it's just
Very, very closed off.
Yes.
They're statistically irrelevant segment, especially when we go into micro-Asian.
Yes. Okay. So you're both correct. Thank you. We do have Asian Americans coming in number one for self-reporting feelings of imposter syndrome. And Prateef, in particular, you are correct. Mental wellness, mental health is very much a stigma in the Asian cultures. So you've got a further barrier to overcome. Most Asian Americans I know of, they've never heard of the term, which is why I think when I did a podcast episode last year, some of you may have listened to it. I put the link in the Facebook group. I was overwhelmed. It was like a tidal wave of Asian Americans reaching out to me, or other people as well, but just so many Asians reaching out to me saying, "Thank you so much for describing this. I didn't know what I was feeling." Okay. So this was me, obviously kind of gave it away, giving you my story. Asian American right here, Korean, grew up in Alabama. Okay. Now, in terms of what is imposter syndrome, in the actual official imposter syndrome as defined by the very first people who ever wrote about it, by Dr. And then followed up by Dr. Valerie Young, it has three main elements. Okay, so do not confuse imposter syndrome with just doubting yourself. There is a clear difference, and I'll show you in a little bit why. So imposter syndrome is, number one, feeling like a fraud and having the fear that you're going to be discovered at any moment. And the reason why you have this is because you have a compulsive habit of explaining away success. Now, in terms of explaining away success, who thinks they have some idea of what this looks like or what this sounds like? I think many of you probably do this in your daily life. Okay. Okay, so while maybe some of you are thinking about this, I have a little story. I have a friend. Her name is Benny. She doesn't work. So I've been friends with this woman for over a year, and I noticed she was around anytime I wanted to call her, almost anytime. Her schedule was completely available. And I was like, how is this possible? And then one day the subject finally comes up because I ask her about it. I'm like, what are you doing every day? Like you don't go to a job. Like, do you have something? Are you selling courses? Like, what is this? It turns out she has passive income in real estate. And I'm like, wow, you're living the dream, man. Like you're not working, you have money coming in, so you get to do whatever you want. Like your time is yours. And it turns out that she researched for quite a while to invest in real estate. And then the crazy thing is, when I tell her she's living the dream and this is so amazing, she goes, "Oh, this was nothing. Like I got lucky." And then she was like, "I was just in the right place at the right time." And I was like, you researched the real estate market for over a year and you saved up for 10 years to come up with the capital to invest, and you think you got lucky? Like, what?" And then she just continues. She continues and says, no, seriously, if I can do it, anyone can. And literally, she's going down this list saying all of these. And we reach this point where I say, "What are you doing?" And she goes, "What do you mean?" And I say, "You realize you are trying really hard to put yourself down." And it was just this moment, like the shocked silence. She doesn't like hearing that. And she's like, "I've never thought of it like that." So you're looking at some of the most common phrases for the constant explaining away of your success. It's a constant downplaying, constantly dismissing what you've done. And this is what really starts leading to those feelings of imposterness, like you're some kind of fraud because you're not owning it. Now, I'm going to get into the 5 types of imposter syndrome. And when I say the 5 types, I'll show you what I mean. But just keep in mind that in general, the person who is feeling a little bit impostery is generally kind of feeling like this. Like you are trying very hard to avoid being discovered, to not be crushed. That feeling like the shoe is going to drop or the other shoe is going to drop, This is all feeding into the same types of feelings. So as I go through the rest of the presentation, the 5 imposter syndrome types, I want you to make a note and just keep asking yourself, how does this manifest for me? So here's the next one. This person feels like I could have done better, like always. I always feel like I could have done better. What's your best guess? Perfectionists. Okay, I see them scrolling in.
Yeah, a lot of perfectionists.
Yeah. So yes, you are right. So this is the person, and this is where I will say, versus how we think of it in the mainstream, perfectionism in imposter syndrome, like the tie-in, is a little bit more specific. So the true perfectionist is somebody who will not settle for less than 100%. So I'm talking about, this is a person where they get a 99%, a 98%, and they will focus on that missing 2%. This is a person who will say, I didn't get 100, therefore I failed. And now what I see as like the number one mistake most people making is they will confuse perfectionism with the pursuit of excellence. They're not the same. So while they share this desire to improve, the type of energy is coming from is very different. The person who is in the pursuit of excellence will continue to strive for improvement, continue to strive for excellence, while understanding that what they have in the moment is good enough. Okay, so keep that in mind. The perfectionist will say, I didn't get 100%, therefore I failed. I'm a failure. This whole thing is garbage. I must start over again. It's completely different energy. And because of this sort of mindset, they can be a nightmare to work with. This is the person who tends to be a micromanager. Because not only do they have these perfectionistic standards for themselves, they also hold them for others, especially for direct reports, because they see direct reports as a reflection of themselves.
Can I ask a question here?
Mm-hmm.
So there was a question in the chat about where does humility fit into all of this? And it does fit in somewhere, I'm sure. But the thing that I was thinking about here, it just happened to me when Partiv was complimenting my book and I couldn't take the compliment. And then I had to catch myself before the end of that conversation to thank him. And I learned this maybe 20 years ago when I got what I thought was an unjustified standing ovation at a conference, and I didn't take it in. And so, but I don't see myself as a perfectionist though. So and I don't know if anybody else feels this or not. I don't know. I'm not just saying this about me. I'm saying there's a feeling of like whatever I just think I'm needy maybe or something, but I see that no matter how much people would applaud, it wasn't enough. Where does that fit into that I could have always done better?
Well, let me ask you this though. Not enough in what way?
I thought I fell short, and they're giving me applause, and I didn't think I deserved it. So maybe it has to do with whether I think I deserve it or not. And I'm sure people feel that too. I don't know.
Yeah. So that is actually pretty common, not just for the perfectionists, but for people in general. But the I could have done better, the I don't deserve this does align a little bit more closely with the perfectionist. But remember when I said, even before you get to feelings of imposter syndrome, there is the constant downplaying. And the comment you mentioned in the chat earlier, we also tend to confuse humility, confidence, and arrogance. We think being confident is also being arrogant, and that's also not the case.
No, definitely not.
Right. And so just real quick to clear up this mystery, if any of us in the group are also having this, the definition of being humble means that you are fully aware of the reality that is yourself. Okay. You're able to recognize your strengths and also your weaknesses without overinflating any factor or diminishing any factor that played a part in your success. And so the arrogant person will say, I did it all on my own. I never had any help, never needed any help, which is, of course, a bold-faced lie. No one gets to where they are without some help. The confident person, the confident and humble person will say, yeah, I've had a lot of great mentors along the way, like Brian Kurtz, and I've put in the work to leverage these learnings towards my success. The person with imposter syndrome will say something like, I only got hired because they were meeting their diversity quota. Okay, so that diversity quota statement is an example of the diminishing your own effort, whereas the arrogant person is overinflating the factor, that they played in their success. So all of this is very closely related. And you may not see yourself as a perfectionist, and you probably aren't, but there's also something else at play is a lot of people, their self-image does not match with other people's images of who they are. And so when you have those moments like the standing ovation or people congratulating you, it can be like a real dissonance, like that moment, which will then trigger, like stop, shut up, and I will actually address that later. So thank you.
Yeah, because I think the thing I learned was that you have to like physically acknowledge, if you don't acknowledge it in the moment and let it go past, then you can't get any benefit from it. Not benefit in terms of taking advantage or anything like that, but to be able to get some benefit from it so you can build on something as opposed to just building on sand when you just say, that didn't mean anything. That was bullshit, whatever. And I had to learn that. I had to learn that over 20 years. My first 20 years took me a long time to acknowledge accolades. Took me a long time.
Well, I think a lot of us can relate to that. And so there is a cultural component as well. Like, I don't know your background, but in many cultures, to just accept a compliment is considered arrogant. Like, you have a big head. So that is something a lot of us have to actively unlearn. So
I'm Jewish, and there is something in there. Someone put something in about the Jewish mother syndrome. If you're not a doctor or a lawyer, then you're a failure, kind of thing. And there's a lot of that goes on in every culture. I'm not saying just Jewish, but in my Jewish culture, there was a lot of that. It's like, if you're not going to be a doctor, a lawyer, or an accountant, you're a loser. And it's something that you need to tune out, or else you're going to be in this, what you're talking about, in your life forever, I think.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, doctor, lawyer, engineer is the typical Asian triad.
There you go.
So very similar. So just keep these in mind, okay? So that's one of the sort of triggers you've identified. So keep all of this in mind in terms of where are these feelings kind of originating from. So most of us aren't born, or I would say probably none of us are born with this feeling of, I'm not good enough, I should be somebody different, I should blah, blah, blah. Most of that comes from the external world. So just keep these things in mind, make a note. I would encourage you to take notes of what comes up for you, like as you're listening to this. Okay, so let's go on to the next type.
Thanks for listening to the Timeless Marketing Podcast with Brian Kurtz. Visit briankurtz.net and click podcast at the top of the page for a full transcript and show notes. If you are interested in working with Brian personally inside of Titans Accelerator, go to briankurtz.net/help to see how Titans can help you grow and scale your business. That's briankurtz.net/help.